Welcome, everyone. I'm Tanya, the Director of Counseling and Outreach at YWCA Calgary. Today is May 6th, and this is also Mental Health Week. Today I'm joined by Karen. Karen, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Karen. I'm one of the counselors in the counseling department.
So today we're very happy to be here because we're talking about the connection between mental health and healthy relationships and the meaningful connections we have with others. We're going to talk about how our mental wellness directly shapes the quality of our relationships. And we're also going to provide some practical strategies to strengthen both our mental health and our relationships. So today we will start with the why and exploring that connection between mental wellness and healthy relationships. And then we'll move into how and some of those practical strategies that anyone can use right away. Our learning objectives is to understand how mental wellness and relationships are interconnected, to recognize common mental health challenges and the impacts on relationships, to learn some evidence based strategies to promote healthier connections, and to increase our overall knowledge of practical support and resources. Okay, so mental wellness and relationships. The research and clinical experience show us that the link is bidirectional. And what that means is that when our mental health is strong, our relationships can thrive. And also that supportive relationships can protect our mental health. So it works both ways in that bidirectional way. Mental health, of course, is internal and it's very individual. And that's really where healthy relationship starts. It's the relationship that we have with ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, all of those internal thoughts and messages, and our emotional health and being self-aware. And that's really number one in our first consideration is having a healthy relationship with ourselves and taking care of our own mental health and emotional well-being. And then we look to relationship with others. And again, that's very bidirectional because healthy relationships with others supports greater mental wellness and well being. So, self awareness as the foundation. Karen, do you want to talk a bit about this? What does this mean?
Sure. So a lot of times people might start out thinking, I have all these things going on in my life, lots of challenges, lots of maybe challenging people, we all know what that's like. And so sometimes we can think about, the problems that we're having, we need to find ways to sort of manage other people or that kind of thing. But what we really understand is that it has to start with our own self-awareness and what we're bringing into every situation first. We can't control other people, right? So we need to find ways to manage ourselves and to help ourselves. And that starts with our own self-awareness. So even though all these external things are going on, it all has to start with us and noticing, first of all, be kind to ourselves and recognizing we're going through stuff and life is not easy. And that's a day-to-day thing. And just being a little kind to ourselves. And then also noticing, what thoughts am I having today? What feelings am I having? How are these showing up in my behaviors? It's really important to try to know ourselves as well as we can and understand how we react to certain situations, what we might need, and really kind of investigate that for ourselves first, because that's the foundation of how then we will respond to other situations in our lives and react to others, if that makes sense. So if we're feeling stressed, if we're feeling frustrated, it's not that we can just turn that off and not and just not feel that way. There's some other things that we can do with that, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to sort of help ourselves through difficult situations. But yeah, it all starts with noticing ourselves because then we can more authentically be ourselves, right? We can be our actual self and not just trying to like white knuckling it to get through every day. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And so that leads us to think about some common mental health challenges in adulthood. And Karen, do you want to tell us about some of these?
right. So you're going to see me doing air quotes a lot for normal, right? Because we talk a lot nowadays about how a lot of the stresses that we go through and as adults are normal, right? We all have to, we're working, we're taking care of ourselves, we're taking care of other people, dealing with a lot of external things that might be stressing us out. But the reality is even though this is a normal part of human life, all of that stress is going to have an impact on us in some way. And so, again, it's about us noticing that for ourselves and finding ways to manage it. We can't necessarily make these things stop happening, but we don't want to just not acknowledge them and just kind of stuff that stress down, right? That's not considered a healthy way to kind of deal with it. So in addition to stress, there's anxiety. We have to notice, are we too far in the future worrying about things, or are we too far in the past worrying about things? There's nothing wrong with either of those things. It's just noticing for yourself what's happening for you right now and why that might be. And do you need to talk to somebody, or do you need to do some kind things for yourself? Because anxiety is going to be with us. And too often, if we try to turn away from it or like make it go away, that can actually make it bigger. So, noticing again that anxiety is common and we can work with it. Life transitions are important. There can be a lot of grief and sadness that comes sometimes with even these positive life transitions, sometimes becoming a parent or changing our job or things like that, things that we've kind of looked forward to and worked toward in our life. But sometimes it can also lead to us feeling some losses. And that's okay to notice and acknowledge for ourselves and not just try to put a happy face on everything and pretend that everything's okay, right? And then the final thing is noticing, what we've already been through in our life. If we've been through difficult situations, if we've experienced trauma, that might still very much be with us. And so is it with us in a kind of a healthy way, or do we need to kind of find ways to turn the volume down a little bit on how those traumas might still be impacting us? So all of those are again, air quotes, common, but that's not the same as us just being like, yeah, this is just how it is. That's how we just know what we're working with, right? We need to know what we're working with.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. And so how then does these challenges impact our relationships? What can you tell us about this?
So because of all of the things that people are going through, if we haven't yet learned those effective ways to manage our stress and manage our anxiety and manage our life transitions and everything, what can happen is we can start to notice that maybe we're a little bit on edge. Maybe we've become that person in either at home or at work or with friends or in all of those places. Maybe we're a little abrasive, or we're quick to, react to something, or we're short with people. Maybe we've become a little defensive because we're just, we're raw, like we've got a lot going on, and maybe we don't think we have time for those niceties and that time to sort of develop those relationships and the time to explain something to somebody, right? We might hear yourself say, well, they should just know, or why are they bothering me with this, right? And that's a sign that, we're irritable, right? And so, but the problem with that is it leads to misunderstandings. It leads to, things escalating and becoming bigger than they probably needed to be at all. And it can also lead us to sometimes withdraw too from certain relationships and just, kind of cut ourselves off because communicating with others and having relationships, it can be exhausting. And so sometimes we just can turn away from a little bit, and then we can end up actually being isolated. So, and then the other thing about the impact it could have is that if we kind of have some unhelpful patterns of communicating with people or communicating in life, then the more kind of irritable we are, right? And the more these misunderstandings happen, the more those unhealthy patterns can just get reinforced. Well, this is just how I am. This is how I talk. This is how I am what I am, right? If we hear ourselves saying things like that, then it might be a sign that we're in like an unhealthy communication pattern. So it's just important to know that yes, we all have these things going on. We all have a lot of stress. We all have a lot of things. We don't want to be on either end of the spectrum. We don't want to be over here where everything's great and I'm coasting through life and everything's fine, right? On the other side, which is, totally irritable, no relationships, really hard to get along with. We want to find that middle space of life is hard and life is also good. and I want to be able to manage this and have the best experience that I can. So
And I'm definitely hearing that good news in there, that recognizing these patterns and understanding what our patterns are is really that first step to making changes. So that's
right. And that's why
great.
we say you have to start with self-awareness. That's why we say that, right? So yeah.
hmm Yeah, so then we'll move into the practical strategies for having healthy relationships. And really, we want to focus on three. We want to focus on emotion regulation, communication, and boundaries, and how utilizing healthy strategies can build trust and resilience, whereas unhealthy strategies can do the opposite of that. So why don't we start with emotion regulation? What can you tell us about emotion regulation?
So emotion regulation is all about noticing what our emotions or feelings, we can use them interchangeably, are telling us, right? Sometimes our emotions can feel really, really big. And so we might want to turn away from them or shut them down. And sometimes we also might not even know what we're feeling at any given moment. And that's usually because there's just a lot going on and it's hard to kind of pick it out. But the important thing is to know that we have to first know what we're feeling and then we can use that information, right? So it's not that we're responding emotionally, it's that we aren't shutting it down or turning away from it. So the first and important thing that we always say, and this is a really great thing to teach to children, is just naming the emotion. Because if we can name it, and then also the second important part of naming it is saying, yeah, it makes sense that I'm upset right now. So for example, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, and you're really, angry in that moment, that's the first part is I'm angry right now, right? And the second part is, and I have every right to be angry. This person, cut me off and I was scared by that. And it's amazing how, and I've heard this from many people in my work over the years, it's amazing how just doing that name it to tame it strategy can really turn the volume down on the feeling because the feeling is going to push at us until we acknowledge it. It just will. And so if we can do that, that's a really powerful strategy to just name it and be like, yeah, it makes sense that I'm feeling it. And that's it, right? It doesn't have to come with a behavior afterwards. It's just naming it and validating it. Giving naming and validating a try, we really, really recommend it. It's a very, very helpful thing to start to do to kind of turn the volume down on the emotion. Again, we're not taking it away. We're recognizing that we're having it and that we're okay to feel it, right? So that reduces the power of that emotion and can create some space between how we're feeling and then what we tend to do with it. Another great skill is the stop skill. So this is actually, before we do anything, this is a good acronym to have in our minds that we just want to stop. So stop is literally like freezing or not speaking. So you might find yourself really wanting to say something or do something and you just literally stop. And it's taking a step back. So creating that mental and physical space. So we've all heard the idea of taking a break or taking a timeout, but this is slightly different because the other half of the stop skill is we're not just taking a break and pulling back because you have to re-engage at some point, right? We have to find a way to handle this situation, and just walking away from it is just the first part. But then after that, the O is observe for yourself. What's happening inside me right now? So naming the feeling and validating it can be a part of that, but we can notice what are my thoughts or feelings? What are my body sensations? What's actually happening? Am I actually in some kind of danger right now? Or am I feeling that way because somebody has just said something that's made me feel upset, right? Any of it is okay. However you're feeling is okay. You're just observing it. Because once you've observed it, then it's the choice there for the P, which is to proceed mindfully. So when we say mindfully, we don't want to just respond, or we don't want to just react to a situation emotionally, or we don't always just want to react to it like logically. We want to respond to something with our full selves, with all the information that we have in the moment, and with the goal in mind of like resolving the situation or being effective in the way that we react. So that's what the P is for proceed mindfully. However, if people are having difficulty, still having some difficulty or looking for something different, then the tip skill is very, very helpful, especially when the emotions are very, very high, because we can go from 0 to 10 pretty quickly, right? It doesn't have to take that long. So the first one is T, which is temperature. So This can be as simple as splashing some cold water on your face or, holding up 2 frozen bags of peas or ice or something like that. And the science behind that is that it can trick our brain to going into what's called the dive response, where actually our heart rate will settle on its own because we've tricked our body into thinking we're underwater. I'm not a scientist, but that's the way that it was explained to me is it's tricking our body into thinking that we're underwater and we have to do different things. So it changes our breathing and it slows our heart rate down. So that's one way to sort of um, tip the temperature and get ourselves into a different headspace. Intense exercise. So 20 to 30 seconds of vigorous exercise, and I hear a lot of people say, well, I'm at work, I can't do that. But we can sometimes take a break, go to the bathroom, do high knees or jumping jacks for 30 seconds. If we really are committed to trying to get a handle on this emotion and not let it overwhelm us, then sometimes these physical activities are what's needed because we're trying to reconnect the brain with the body, right? And so intense exercise. But again, if you can't get away, if you're in a place where you absolutely have to stay put, sometimes paced breathing, no one has to know that you're doing some paced breathing, breathing in or breathing in for 5, holding, releasing for 5. These are things that we can do kind of in any moment when we're driving, wherever, right? There's a lot of great apps and different ways to kind of activate that paced breathing, which again just helps your body to actually calm down, right? And then there's 2 P's. So the second one is progressive muscle relaxation, which again, I'll say it again, is something you can do, while we're driving, while we're in a meeting. It can just be as simple as like clenching your fists for a little while, for like a few seconds, as long as you can stand it, and then slowly release it and say relax in your brain. And that again has a really big impact on creating some kind of calmness in our body. And so that it reconnects us with the present moment that we're in. And there's lots of great videos and apps and things like that out there for lots of different progressive muscle relaxation ideas, but that's kind of the easiest one if we're kind of in a space where we have to stay put is fists or toes or things like that. So there is a lot of science behind those exercises, and there's a lot of reasons why we encourage people to do them because they just work.
I love the practical strategies, and I always love a good acronym because I know it helps me remember if I'm like, what are the things again? And so stop, like you said, standing for stop, take a step back, observe, and perceive mindfully. And the second acronym tip. So the temperature, intense exercise, pace breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. Yeah, the acronyms hopefully can help us remember the steps and those practical strategies. That's great. And then the second one being effective communication. So what can you tell us about this, about communication?
Right. So the idea here is that once we've sort of, we've settled ourselves, and again, you've heard us talk about it. We're not trying to just pretend we're feeling fine. We're just trying to settle our emotions back to an area where we can use them effectively and we've hopefully settled ourselves back into a reasonably calm mindset because then we have to take some kind of action, right? We have to communicate with other people. That's kind of how the world works, right? And so if we're coming from that mindset, our communication is going to be more effective in the majority of ways. So we've all probably heard of I statements. Different people have different ideas of how to make those work for ourselves, for sure. But the idea of an I statement is just owning what we're thinking and feeling, as opposed to like pointing the finger and being like you, because nobody likes this, right? This is not fun. So if I feel this, I think this, right? And then the other person gets the opportunity as well, because we're all entitled to our own thoughts and feelings. And then the other part of communication is actually listening to what the other person said. So I don't know if anyone else does this, but I've certainly been guilty in my life of I'm listening, but I'm just listening to decide what I'm going to say to rebut whatever they've said. That's not effective communication or active listening, right? We've already jumped ahead to what we think they're going to say, and we need to stop that and actually listen to understand what the other person is saying. It's quite an intense skill. It does take a lot of practice. We all think maybe we're doing it really well, but we can always improve on that to actually listen to understanding. Because if we get to talk and then the other person gets to talk and we're really listening, it's almost like a dance, right? And then that's the way we can actually resolve issues, or at least, you know, improve the relationship so that even if we've had conflict, the relationship is still intact. That's the way to do it, right? Is to have that back and forth. So we want to be specific when particularly when if the feelings are high or the conflict is kind of more intense. That's when we really want to use these skills for sure because we need them more. Being specific, being honest, but also being kind, staying present in whatever it is we're talking about, but also knowing that sometimes, we've talked about it a lot and maybe we need a break. That's being kind to ourselves and to the other person. We might not get to the end of this conversation right now. We might have to talk about this a few more times. So maybe we need to put a break on it and come back to it. And recognizing what is the goal? Is the goal to resolve a certain thing? And that might be the goal. The goal might also be, I want to keep this relationship intact. I don't want to argue with this person and have unhealthy conflict. So we can take a break and come back and talk about it a bit later. So sometimes we think effective communication, if you think it's about getting your way, that's not what we're saying. Effective communication is really about all the parties being able to say what they need to say in a safe, healthy way and work toward a common goal.
Yeah, that's great. Very helpful. And then our third skill that we want to talk about is boundaries. And so, yeah, what would you say about boundaries?
So boundaries is something that does get talked a lot about nowadays, which is great. There are some misconceptions out there, so we like to be really clear about what boundaries are. Boundaries are not ultimatums or demands or even requests of other people. Boundaries are really what we need in order to feel like we're protecting our physical, emotional, and time-related well-being. So it's again back to self-awareness. It's important for us to kind of identify what our boundaries are. How do we like to be spoken to? How do we like to be have other people treat us? That's the first part. And then the second part is what are we willing to do if the other person doesn't behave in that way that keeps us safe, right? Because if we just constantly, let that boundary be crossed, but we aren't able to say anything about it, then it's not a boundary anymore, right? It's just we're constantly, feeling like we're being having somebody put something on us all the time. And that doesn't foster healthy relationships with other people. Similarly, if we don't let the other person know that it's something that bothers us, then again, that's not fostering healthy relationships because, we might need to let them know, hey, when you're constantly late, this is how it makes me feel, these kinds of things, right? So boundaries are really important at the earliest point because I think we can all relate to sometimes we let things go a little bit and then it's only later when it's happened a bunch of times and then we end up having maybe a big fight about it. So we're just encouraging people to, again, in the spirit of self-awareness, really understand what they need. It's not up to other people to get us what we need, it's up to us to get what we need. So how do we protect our energy? How do we protect our time? How do we promote, mutual respect by asking other people to treat us in a certain way, right? How that person responds to our boundary, that's information about them in the relationship with us. But again, it's really about us saying what what we're willing to do in order to protect ourselves. So an example is if somebody's constantly saying, I need dropping in on you and saying, I need you to drive me to this appointment, or I need this, or I need this. A simple boundary can be, I'm happy to help with you in the future, but I need 24 hours notice. So it's not shutting it down, but it's also saying what we need. And it can be as simple as that, right? And generally people, once they're able to sort of know their boundaries and enforce their boundaries for themselves, generally mental health can really improve from that.
Mhm. No, that's great. I think it really it reinforces that boundaries are good. Boundaries are important. That it's okay to step away temporarily. And sometimes people get kind of mixed up of what boundaries, what it means, and what they're not. And I think what you're saying is like they are important, and the things that boundaries are not like. It's not about walls or barriers or being selfish or rude or it's not about controlling other people. It's also not a one size fits all. There's not a boundary that everybody needs to have exactly the same. It is very personal. Um, And they can also change and move over time. It doesn't have to be that permanent ultimatum that's going to last of all time for all time. But certainly,
Mhm.
it's important to know what your boundaries are, and how they can be important, when they fit right for you and when you're able to communicate that. So that's great. And hopefully, those three strategies are helpful when we talk about emotion regulation, communication, and boundaries. Were the three strategies that we talked about today. And so this slide again just reminds us how the three of those strategies how they work together. That emotion regulation keeps you grounded, and then communication lets you express yourself clearly, and then boundaries protect the process and everyone involved. That it can be really helpful for everyone. And also, like you said, Karen, it really helps us to navigate conflict effectively, or navigate difficult conversations, or when things are intense in our relationships, and when there is conflict present. And we know that conflict is a normal part of life. And it's also important how we handle conflict. How we handle it can certainly build trust and connection and closeness in relationships when it's handled in the right way. And using these strategies, using healthy emotion regulation, communication, and boundaries, de-escalate conflict when we need it the most, and build those stronger connections and mutual respect, and just things that strengthen our relationships. So thank you so much, Karen, for explaining those strategies, those practical strategies, and giving a really good explanation of all three. And I just want to remind everyone of some resources. YWCA Calgary, we offer a number of programs and services that focus on mental health and healthy relationships. All right, we have a counseling department that has individual and group counseling options. Our groups focus on healthy relationships, mindfulness, emotion regulation, many practical skills and strategies that we can teach and we can pass along to others, to strengthen relationships. We have our information here on the slide of how you can reach out to us. And we have a few takeaways, such as caring for your own mental wellness and just how important that is. That it truly is the foundation of healthy relationships with ourselves and with others. Small, consistent practices in each of these skills can really lead to big changes in our lives, and that support and resources are available. And we hope that today's conversation can either inspire you to focus on your mental health and your relationships, reach out to support and resources when you need them, recommend them to people in your life who might benefit from these resources. Again, our website is here. You can check us out to learn more about the programs and services we offer. And then I also do a shout out to Community Connect YYC. The website is here, which is communityconnectyyc.ca. And that's a great resource in Calgary, because anybody can go on that website and browse and search accessible counseling services in Calgary that are available. And they're all listed in one place, which is really great, where you don't have to go to multiple websites or look to multiple organizations. You can go on here and actually find many. You can find many supports and services in our community that can be helpful to you. So check us out. Check out Community Connect YYC. Happy Mental Health Week. I hope that you're taking care of your mental health. This is such an important topic for everyone. So thank you for joining us today.